All right, think about this for a second. Your brain, it's like this incredibly powerful computer, right? Running this super complex, elegant algorithm that is, well, you. But what happens if that algorithm gets corrupted? I mean, really messed up by something on the outside? And what if, get this, the only way to fix it is to basically invent a whole new language just to describe the bug? That's the absolutely fascinating case we're cracking open today. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the puzzle itself, then dig into what we're calling the human operating system. We'll look at how the hardware got corrupted and what went wrong with the debugger. Then we'll explore this idea of a concealed place of harm. And finally, how a unique language became the key to recovery. I mean, just think about that question. How do you describe a total system failure when the system is you? When your own mind feels like it's glitching out and the way you see the world is just off? How do you even find the words for that? Especially when normal, everyday language just doesn't come close to describing it. Well, that was the exact incredible challenge facing the person at the heart of this story, Dennis Verhage.
All right, so first up, a neurocognitive puzzle. Let's dig into the unique profile of Dennis Verhage.
Okay, to really get this, you first have to understand the system we're talking about. Dennis is described as a 3DBT. That stands for bilingual, bicultural, twice exceptional dyslexic. Now, that term twice exceptional is super important here. It means someone who is both gifted and has a learning disability. Think about that for a second. That combination creates this totally unique neurocognitive architecture. It's a brain that's just wired differently, It's running its own incredibly complex operating system. And this right here is where we get to the central mystery of the whole thing. To explain this massive system failure that was happening inside him, Dennis didn't just go to a therapist and use the usual psychological language. Nope. He built this incredibly meticulous, super detailed explanation using language from computer science, from deep neurobiology, and even from ancient symbolism. And you just have to ask, why? Why go to all that trouble? Why create this unbelievably intricate, cross-disciplinary language? Well, to answer that question, we've got to start decoding the language of his very own human operating system. So the first thing you have to wrap your head around is the central metaphor he uses. Verhage sees his mind as running a neural algorithm, and we're not talking about some simple little program here. This is a deeply complex set of cognitive processes and systemic rhythms, and he even codifies them using things like Base 16 from computer science. This algorithm is what governs everything: his thinking, his memory, his spatial processing, the whole shebang. Now, as any programmer will tell you, any complex system needs a debugger. So in this human context, who's the debugger? Well, it's supposed to be an external expert, someone like a forensic psychiatrist. Their job is pretty clear: find the bugs in the system, pinpoint where things are going wrong, and then help with the repairs and accommodations needed, which is especially crucial for someone who is neurodivergent. And I want to be really clear here. This language he's using is not random. Not at all. It's a very precise logical framework. For instance, he uses Base 16, hexadecimal, which is a fundamental tool for debugging code. And he even links this framework to the name Tom, which for him is a symbol of innocence and integrity, the core values his system should be running on. So what's the angle of all this? It's simple, really: to analytically debug the corruption happening inside his own system.
Okay, so we've got the software, the algorithm, down. But what happens when the hardware itself, the physical brain, starts getting corrupted? Well, that's where things get really serious, and we see how these external failures can turn into real, embodied harm. And there's a clear chain of events here. It all starts on the outside with what he calls systemic betrayal, a total lack of support. This external pressure leads to something called neural desynchronization, which is just a fancy way of saying key pathways in the brain get all thrown out of whack. And the most important thing to get here is that this isn't just in his head. It becomes embodied harm. It physically shows up as messed up perception and even affects his motor control. So the bottom line is, this external stress causes a literal biological corruption of his internal neural chip. I mean, think of it like the main processor in your laptop getting physically damaged. What happens next? The software, that complex algorithm, starts glitching out. It starts making errors. Or, as he puts it, the system starts to drop balls. And his analysis is unbelievably specific. He doesn't just say, "My brain feels weird." He pinpoints the biological epicenter of the damage to a very specific part of the brain, the supramalleary nucleus, or SUM. Now, the SUM's main job is to regulate these things called theta rhythms, which are absolutely essential for memory and spatial processing. So for a 3D visual thinker, a 3D VT, those rhythms aren't just important, they're everything. And the stress he was under just threw these rhythms into total chaos. We're talking about a catastrophic failure at the very core of how he processes the world. So let's recap. The system is failing. The hardware is literally damaged. You have to be asking, where was the debugger? Where was the expert who was supposed to help? Well, this is the really tragic part of the story. It turns out the debugger actually became a primary source of the corruption.
Yeah, just look at this contrast. It's pretty stark. On one side, you have the expected role, the debugger, someone who's supposed to evaluate, advocate, and support. But then you look at what actually happened. Instead of helping, this person became part of the problem. They totally neglected his unique neurocognitive needs, they dismissed the very real stressors he was facing, and in doing so, they actually made the whole neural dysregulation thing worse. They became, in his incredibly precise language, a dim sum.
And that metaphor, man, it's just devastatingly precise, isn't it? The very person who was supposed to help became a living symbol of the part of the brain that was being damaged, a dimmed supramammillary nucleus. They weren't just useless. By failing so completely in their role, they actively became a force that was making the biological harm worse.
So you've got this profound failure, right? Happening both deep inside, biologically, and on the outside, in the very system that's supposed to provide care. This created a state of suffering so total, so all-encompassing, that it needed a very specific word to capture it. And to really understand this state, we have to kind of reclaim a word we all think we know. Just for a minute, set aside all the modern religious ideas you have about the word hell, because originally it comes from an ancient Proto-Germanic word, Hullyo, and all that meant was a concealed place, the underworld, a hidden realm. And when you think about it that way, that ancient definition becomes a perfect technical description for what Dennis was going through. His suffering was entirely internal. It was invisible to everyone else. A deep neurobiological struggle that was completely hidden from the outside world. It was a concealed place created by systemic neglect and embodied harm. In the most literal, original sense of the word, it was hell. So, the million-dollar question is, how do you get out of a place like that? And that brings us to our final part of this explainer and the big reveal. We're going to see why this incredibly complex language wasn't just a symptom of the problem. It was actually the key to the solution. See, just as there was an algorithm for the system's failure, it turns out there's an algorithm for healing too, and it's built on this beautiful code of natural harmony. He uses things like specific numbers, 2426 for example, and links them to a base 13 structure, which to him represents balance. And what does that mean biologically? Well, it mirrors the rhythms of oxytocin, the social bonding hormone. And for a 3D visual thinker like him, oxytocin is absolutely crucial for creating the neural coherence, the stability needed to rebuild the whole system from the ground up. And this, right here, is the key takeaway of this entire story. Why all the complexity? Why the computer science and the neurobiology? Because for a twice exceptional mind, a brain that is literally built to see and take apart complex systems, you can't fix a massive system failure with simplistic, everyday language. It just won't work. You have to deconstruct the problem with a language that is every bit as integrated and sophisticated as the system you're trying to fix. So please, get this one crucial point. The language was never just a symptom of the breakdown. The language is the tool. It's the diagnostic software, it's the debugger, and it's the patch to fix the code, all rolled into one amazing package. It is the actual process a unique mind uses to take back control, diagnose its own corruption, and finally, begin the incredible work of rebuilding itself. And so that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If a person's internal system, their mind, their very being, is uniquely complex, then maybe, just maybe, their path to healing has to be built on a language that is just as personal, just as intricate, and just as uniquely their own. What do you think?